Welcome to Rain World, a story of tragedy, anger, forgiveness, and ultimately, infinity. Rain World has been my 5-month-long obsession. Its story and lore are difficult to understand even in the best of times. So I've decided to share my insane obsession with this game with you all. Welcome to Rain World. Welcome to the cycle. I'm sure you've seen the world my creators left behind them. The surface beyond the facility walls is a sea of mud, ruins, and thick plant life. The ground out there is almost like water, and few things remain stable. Ancient structures uncovered by fissures only to become buried again. Looks to the moon. Rainworld takes place on a terrestrial planet similar to Earth, with a yellow sun and a singular moon that can be seen alongside peculiar green stars in the night sky. The surface of the planet is icy and cold, and apart from the ruins of countless civilizations past, devoid of almost all life. The only exception to this is the fauna and flora that gather around massive megastructures, for their simple operation gives off enough heat to keep the ice and cold at bay. Eons ago, an ancient civilization much like modern humans inhabited the planet. They built towering cities and massive systems of communications, structures, and feats of engineering that the physical laws of the universe should prevent. Even such developed society could not escape the grasp of the great cycle that impacted all living creatures. Birth, death, and rebirth were connected to each other like a ring, making true death impossible. It became this civilization's goal to break free of the cycle, a process known as transcendence. These creatures and this civilization are known as the Ancients. The aforementioned Ancients were a powerful society, heavily enveloped in their traditions and beliefs, which left long-lasting impacts on the creatures that inhabit this world. The Ancients developed methods and spiritual instructions used by beings such as monks to rid oneself of natural urges. These methods were practiced in an effort to escape the Great Cycle, but there is no indication that these instructions were able to achieve any success. Now you may be asking, Solar, what is the Great Cycle? The Great Cycle is complicated. Essentially, all beings in the universe of Rainworld are locked in an everlasting cycle of death and rebirth. Creatures can die out, and new species can emerge and evolve, but no soul ever truly leaves this world. Each time this great cycle repeats, it is referred to as a cycle. The other prevalent, intelligent species besides the Ancients are the slugcats, a nomadic, stout-bodied bipedal organism capable of hunting, nonverbal communication, and social interaction. Technically, they are rodents, but they look like a slug combined with a cat, so the community of Rainworld has hence dubbed them the slugcats. Their abilities are not dissimilar to the scavengers, a lankier, more primate-like species that are much more tribal and collective, wary of other creatures, but capable of trading communication with others, if the proper precautions are taken, of course. Alright, you got all that? Good, because now we need to talk about the void fluid revolution. If you leave a stone on the ground and come back sometime later, it's covered in dust. This happens everywhere, and over several lifetimes of creatures, such as you. The ground slowly builds upwards, so why doesn't the ground collide with the sky? Because far, far down, under the very, very old layers of the earth, the rock is being dissolved or removed. The entity which does this is known as the Void Sea. If you drill far enough into the earth, you begin encountering a substance called void fluid. The deeper you go, the less rock and the more void fluid. It's believed that there is a point where the rock completely gives way. Below that would be the Void Sea. 5 pebbles. At some point in their history, the ancient civilization discovered what later came to be known as the Void Sea, far below the surface in the depths. The Void Sea was comprised entirely of void fluid. While it was difficult to harvest the fluid due to its nature of dissolving anything that comes into contact with it, devices known as void drills were invented to gather up small amounts of void fluid embedded in rocks slightly above the Void Sea, where its concentration is lower and it wouldn't pose a risk to the equipment. The impurities such as rock and sediments were then filtered out to obtain a sample of the pure liquid. This period of time in the Rainworld universe is called the Void Fluid Revolution. This fluid was soon found to be an outstanding source of energy, leading to the creation of devices such as the mass rarefaction cell. As looks to the moon, an iterator we meet, says, when being given a pearl, "Oh, this is from the old drill site north of the farm array. It's quite ancient, as the mines predate my construction." The early ages of the Void Fluid Revolution were an explosive period of innovation and industry. By creating a vacuum of empty space and inducing a flux in the energy fields around the singular null point you created, you can cause a fuel mass of base elements to decompose into energy. This process is called mass rarefaction. Of course, this undertaking required extremely pure samples to properly craft rarefaction cells. Older mines on the surface became abandoned once underground construction became much easier, though most of the nearby systems were connected anyways, regardless of age or depth. Void fluid isn't exactly easy to purify, or even properly maintain. The pearl itself is simply a maintenance and production log for one of the 47 operating drill silos. Looks to the moon. Sorry if you're a bit confused. Pearls are reflective, spherical objects used by the ancients to store information, ranging from stories to images to songs. Many are found scattered throughout Rainworld, holding a vast array of history and data, although most of them are communications. The only way of knowing what they say during the actual time of the game Rainworld takes place in, however, is to take them to an iterator. After further studies, it was found that the void fluid does not just dissolve objects, it also removes them from the physical realm. Attempts were made to dig even deeper into the depths to find higher concentrations of void fluid, as well as uncover more information about it, but the ancients' equipment simply broke or dissolved. As later described, no one returned if they ventured too deep into the depths. However, this property of the void fluid coincided with what the ancients thought to be the solution to escaping the Great Cycle. The civilization believed that the ability of the void fluid to remove one from the physical world was the transcendence they had longed for. Since any that came into contact with the void fluid did not return, it was inferred that they must have broken free of the cycle. However, a risk was associated with taking the plunge into the void sea to escape the world. Not even void fluid was enough to remove those with sufficiently large egos from the physical realm, as several ancients that did not entirely transcend are likely to be the echoes seen throughout the timeline. These creatures claim to know how to transcend, but express a sense of regret and sorrow being trapped within the mortal realm and the transcendent realm. In order to transcend, it seems that one would have had to abandon all attachments and entering an effortless state. These are summarized with what they referred to as the 5 natural urges, the first being wrath and violence, the second being lust, the third being material possession or attachment, the fourth being gluttony and indulgence, and the fifth being self-preservation and ego. These are the first 5 of the 10 known levels of karma, with the symbols that represent the latter half changing with the current maximum karma level. With such a degree of commitment required, and with the knowledge of the consequences of failure, the ancients once again turned to archaic methods to rid of one's natural urges and ego, before deciding to use void fluid in order to finally transcend. However, this seemed to be not an entirely perfect solution, which would explain why the iterators were constructed. The last karma symbol seems to be the desire to ascend up. You may have heard me throw around the word iterator quite a bit. Well, lucky you, you're about to learn a whole bunch about them. The iterators are one of, if not the most important part of Rainworld lore. Most things in Rainworld revolve either around the Slugcats, the Ancients, or the Iterators. The ancient civilization began using its technological prowess to create and construct the Iterators. Iterator was the name given to artificial superintelligences of colossal size and incredible power that were constructed to solve the Great Problem, to find the method of breaking free of the Great Cycle without the use of void fluid. The Iterators were a combination of organic and synthetic components, relying on specially grown microorganisms as machine components and devices. These genetically modified creatures' natural metabolism and reproduction allows the iterators to perform extremely complex calculations beyond the capabilities of electronics physically. In order to keep their electronic components cool and their organic components clean, the iterators required gargantuan amounts of water. Water is the most important resource for our basic function. Most of our processing is outsourced to microstrata, which need a clean flow of water, or else slag builds up, our processes seize, and eventually we die. It is very painful. They used to say that an iterator drinks a river, but neither of us two have seen a natural river, so I suppose the analogy is lost on us. Looks to the moon. The iterators stripped their nearby ecosystems of water, and pumped water vapor back into the atmosphere, where it would condense into rain and be used again. Due to this process and the sheer number of iterators built, the equilibrium of the world's ecosystems was severely disrupted or even destroyed, creating a dense layer of fog and clouds, rife with torrential downpours and periodic flooding. Ultimately, this effect came to be known as the rain. The ancient civilization compensated for this by moving away from living on the surface and constructed immense, dense cities directly on top of the surface of iterators, cans. Cans are like a housing unit for the iterators. Almost like your personal computer has a casing, iterators have cans. In addition to computing the solution to the great problem of transcendence, the iterators were tasked with providing regular shipments of food, water, equipment, and void fluid for energy to these colonies. Of the pieces of the iterators that we get to see in the game, there are only a few that are a part of all of them. The memory conflux serves as the active memory structure for use by the system, likely for both short and long-term memory, with individual cells often filled with brittle core-like lattices that can be seen reconstructing themselves, likely serving as an active individual thread or process. The general systems bus, neural terminus, and primary cortex are all close to the central iterator puppet chamber, with the general systems bus and the neural terminus serving as highways for purpose organisms like the neuron fly, with access tunnels and buses directly to the chamber and its immediate surroundings. And, connecting to further subsystems like the memory conflux and condenser arrays, the primary cortex is a region seen in both iterators, being these systems of large chasms filled with green electric energy discharges, with organisms and conduits weaving through to the core, located nearby but not adjacent to the core chamber, likely serving as more of a back rooms within the core, with a multitude of smaller electrified chambers more closely surrounding some layer around the chamber, which is a system as a whole with a less apparent or known function.
3, 2, 1, fight!
Linear Systems Rail and the Heart both serve as containers for rarefaction cells, serving as immense power sources that are accompanied by the much-needed water distribution systems that span its facilities and flush out processor organism slag and regulate internal and external temperatures. 5 Pebbles and Looks to the Moon serve as the only in-game appearance of iterators and their structures, with Looks to the Moon being the far older of the two, being produced and made around the time of the Ancients being alive. With Silver of Straw playing an important influence in the actions of the iterators, and with others like Seven Red Suns, Chasing Wind, Unparalleled Innocence, and No Significant Harassment, merely appearing in preserved records, logs, or influence in the events that take place, and albeit distant but notable presence within the world. The state of the planet that Rainworld resides in is a cold, frigid wasteland, a world where the only remaining sources of heat come as a byproduct of the iterator superstructures. By the time the iterators were created, this was the known landscape of the world, with previous or otherwise past information on a different state of the environment unknown. Unfortunately, the ancient civilization disappeared and collapsed before the iterators computed the solution to the great problem, due to a massive transcendence movement of the entire population. This left the cities dark and abandoned, if largely intact. This event is known as the Great Transcendence. However, the iterators were left turned on, their final command being to continue working towards a method to transcend without using void fluid, and to guide lesser creatures on the path to the realm beyond should the solution ever be discovered. Over the next indeterminate amount of cycles up until the start of the game, the iterators did not achieve any major breakthroughs. Only Silver of Straw claimed to have found and uncovered the solution, but she died almost simultaneously as the confirmation of the success was broadcasted to the other iterators, causing the methods in which she attained this positive result to be lost. Unable to find the solution after Silver of Straw's ascension and growing increasingly frustrated, another iterator, 5 Pebbles, became convinced that there was no solution to the great problem, and there was no reason to keep trying to solve it, and that death was the only way out. It is likely he showed these beliefs off in iterator chat logs under the pseudonym EP, or Erratic Pulse. The ancients had anticipated this kind of thinking, however, and put taboos preventing self-destruction within the iterators' genetics. The only way to circumvent these taboos was a very dangerous and repetitive shuffling of genetics that required heightened water intake. The goal was to cause cells to mutate until the desired genetics were obtained, ones that would overwrite the encoded taboos. It is very likely 5 Pebbles used this method to attempt overwriting his genetics. At some point, 5 Pebbles began drawing several times the usual amount of water, tapping into the neighboring iterator, Looks to the Moon's water source. Looks to the Moon, therefore, used forced communications in order to try and contact him after much deliberation. She was unable to contact him for the longest time despite her attempts, but she found it impossible. 5 Pebbles then genetically shuffled himself an infection. And now, after all that prep, we can talk about the actual content of the games, starting with the Spearmaster. The Spearmaster is a messenger of her 7 red suns, and is sent out to 5 Pebbles for a second time in their lives to deliver a message. They are accompanied by a reddish-orange overseer, operated by 7 red suns. The Spearmaster is an organism created to provide a practical long-term solution for communication between iterators, as their current communication arrays that allow them to use group chats would inevitably decay. The reason for the Spearmaster's current journey to 5 Pebbles, however, is due to the communication and involvement of the 7 red suns and no significant harassment, discovering from other iterators and, in further investigations, that communication has been lost with 5 Pebbles, and the supervisor looks to the moon, of which 5 Pebbles has taken in a significantly larger amount of water than normal and is dehydrating and damaging Moon. At some point during their story, Spearmaster reaches Pebbles. After this, the Spearmaster travels to Moon's can, which is suffering from power failures and structural damage, within cycles of her collapse. With Moon realizing the state of 5 Pebbles and her inevitable situation, she rewrites the pearl that was ripped out of the Spearmaster to contain what would be her last message to the local iterator group, with the Spearmaster delivering it to the communications arrays to send this message. After her final message is successfully delivered, Spearmaster supposedly finds her way back to 7 red suns, remaining by their side as a close companion. The Artificer's campaign has less of a significant impact in the timeline and instead a more focused, character-driven story. Throughout their campaign, the Artificer is in a constant conflict with the Scavengers. Because of all the bloodshed, the Artificer is stuck at the first level of karma, which represents the natural urge for violence and wrath. One of the Artificer's slug pups was killed by a scavenger, and that is why this violence exists, as the slug pup stole a pearl from a presumably abandoned scavenger toll. Scavenger tolls are tolls that were set up by scavengers where you have to pay them a pearl in exchange for passage. Since the slug pup stole a pearl from the toll, the scavenger kills her slug pups in cold blood, and so the Artificer begins a quest to avenge the deaths of her slug pups. At the start of the campaign, the Artificer finds a small drone which follows them on their journey to Five Pebbles Can. Once reaching Five Pebbles Can, Five Pebbles comments on the Artificer's way of life and how it seems to be disgusting to him. The Artificer then journeys into Metropolis and assassinates the Chieftain Scavenger, taking its mantle and eradicating the remaining scavengers in Metropolis. The Hunter is sent by No Significant Harassment with a pearl and a slag reset neuron to help Moon in her state of decay. The Hunter is deathly sick, and an ominous countdown ticks down each cycle before hitting 0, and the Hunter becoming a sick and deathly animal, having seizures and spasms. After the Hunter gives Moon the slag reset neuron to help restart her, she reads an aquamarine pearl that the Hunter gives her, which reads as follows: Triple affirmative, triple affirmative. In all seriousness though, noticed barely any rain coming from your can, so I figured a little support might be in order. Wasn't that easy to see, of course, with Pebbles' shall we say healthy output. Enjoy the slag keys, excuse the unorthodox delivery method, equipment eroding, be well, no significant harassment. Okay, so you may be asking, what exactly is a triple affirmative? Well, a triple affirmative is 3 things. It is an affirmative that a solution has been found, an affirmative that a technical implementation is possible and generally applicable. No Significant Harassment was known to be sarcastic and flippant, and so most likely titled the pearl with this as a means of joking. If the Hunter is to transcend after this event, the Hunter is seen with a strange purple goo coming out of it before being seen in the arms of an iterator-like figure, presumably No Significant Harassment. It is not known what the sickness the Hunter had was, but it seems to be the rot, which Five Pebbles also has. The rot is that experiment that went wrong, and he genetically infected himself with it. It is also an experiment that theoretically would have had the solution to the great problem, and was designed and enacted by Five Pebbles. However, Looks to the Moon interrupted him while the experiment was still going, causing it to turn into the rot, a disease-like growth that infects Five Pebbles in areas it spread to, as well as infecting different animals, like the slug cat. Alright, so if you're wondering why the video you're watching is suddenly on a different audio track, it's because I messed up the next part of this recording and accidentally mixed up my settings. Please ignore it, I'm sorry. The Gourmand is a slug cat venturing from the Outer Expanse's tribe of slug cats into the rest of Five Pebbles' grounds to scout out new land for their tribe. Somewhere along its journey, presumably after reaching Looks to the Moon, they reach Five Pebbles' superstructure and receive the mark of communication. Pebbles opens a gate to the outside world from its facility to allow the Gourmand to leave. Following this, the Gourmand travels past subterranean into the sunken pier, and then into the Outer Expanse where they return to their tribe. They tell all the other slug cats of their journey, and they venture to the facility grounds. Sometime after this, the survivor is separated from their family by heavy rainfall in the Outer Expanse, falling into a pipe leading to outskirts. The survivor is guided by one of Moon's overseers, leading them towards Moon with images of their family and encouraging the survivor to bring additional neurons to repair her memory. After visiting Moon, the survivor travels to Five Pebbles, who grants them the mark of communication and guides them to the depths. The survivor, once in the depths, jumps into the void fluid and transcends, leaving behind the old world. The monk is seemingly a younger sibling to the survivor, jumping after their older sibling during the beginning cutscene. The monk's story appears to take place shortly after the survivor's story, and they also transcend through the void, reuniting with their sibling. Ladies and gentlemen, we now enter the era of the downfall of Rainworld. The Rivulet begins by falling into the drainage system alongside a dead scavenger after an explosion. They start with the mark of communication and a unique pearl inside their stomach. With the current state of the world, the Rivulet is met with fast-paced and violent cycles of rain, although with enough time, the rainfall normalizes. Upon reaching a still-sustained Looks to the Moon, Rivulet learns that the pearl is a schematic of an iterator superstructure, with a detailed path of approach outlined for the maintenance of a linear power rail, the layout of which is unfamiliar to herself. and a lymphatic conduit water distribution system that is only present in later iterator models, prompting her to realize that the closest iterator that would share these schematics would be 5 Pebbles. With Moon remarking that she has not had contact with Pebbles for a long time and showing concern, the Rivulet heads to 5 Pebbles. The architecture seen within memory crypts can be found to have deteriorated and collapsed before reaching the iterator of 5 Pebbles can. Upon entry, it is found that 5 Pebble structure has been heavily consumed by the rot. With the extent of this decay, the Rivulet is now left to reaching 5 Pebbles through the previously mentioned lymphatic conduit water distribution system, a series of water-filled pipes that span most of the interior and serve as a backbone to traversing the severely decayed structure. Within 5 Pebbles' chamber, he can now be seen in a state of disrepair, with the umbilical that connects him to the rest of his structure now dysfunctional, much like Looks to the Moon. Unlike Looks to the Moon, he has a music pearl to comfort him in his inevitable destruction. In a final attempt to redeem himself, he asks Rivulet to take his last rarefaction cell found within the linear system's rail embedded deep in his structure, and give it to Looks to the Moon. Upon removal of the mass rarefaction cell, the fluctuations in power cease as gravity is normalized and all the flux condensers are visibly inactive. After the Rivulet finds their way back to Looks to the Moon, Moon comments on the sudden normalization in the rain as the last activity of 5 Pebbles ceases, drastically increasing the length between cycles, at such a point beyond the normal length for other slugcats. This gives enough evidence that the short and violent cycles that plague the Rivulet were a result of a greatly increased water intake from 5 Pebbles. With the mass rarefaction cell in hand, Looks to the Moon details that these are emergency power sources that the iterators have become more dependent upon as their creators no longer exist to maintain them. She references the event of all of her rarefaction cells becoming dislodged and carried away in the floodwaters. After the Rivulet is able to reach the heart of the submerged superstructure, they are thrust out into bitter air. This cold and desolate region is covered by snowfall and contains an auxiliary transmissions array. Looks to the Moon systems are rebooted, regaining control over her overseers and a portion of her newly powered systems, leaving her with these recovered memories and details of the events that have transpired before and after her collapse, including those of the preceding slugcats and iterators that have helped her. Though, through the recordings derived from her overseers, she realized the state of 5 Pebbles and the events that led up to such. Looks to the Moon uses the auxiliary transmissions array to initiate a forced private broadcast with Pebbles, detailing the improvement of her condition and her awareness of the deterioration in communication with the local group. Attempting to reconcile with 5 Pebbles, she pleads that any anger has long since subsided, and she wishes to talk and be there for Pebbles. At the very end, it is shown that 5 Pebbles does indeed receive this communication from Moon from within his chamber, suggesting that they remain in regular contact with each other afterwards, and that the grievances between the two have been resolved, a relationship that remains well into the future. The Saint's story is notable for taking place in the distant future, so far that any significant iterator activity has ceased, with endless snowfall and blizzards replacing rainfall as little heat remains. Various species have evolved adaptations, such as fur, to survive the harsh weather. Several parts of the world have changed considerably. 5 Pebbles' superstructure has collapsed on top of the shaded citadel, creating the silent construct, a wreck of shredded and torn sections of what was 5 Pebbles' can, destroying most of the shaded citadel and bringing light to the remainder. The rot is almost non-existent, where any growth has long since died off from the cold, exposure, and the decay, also missing from places like garbage waste where it was already prominent. The drainage system is now the undergrowth, a rich jungle full of life. Nearly every region was reformed in some way. The unusual heat within undergrowth may be explained by Looks to the Moon's activity, as her submerged superstructure heats the nearby water, which gets circulated through the former facilities. Within the silent construct, 5 Pebbles lies at the exposed and destroyed remains of his chamber, with nothing left but faded pearls and their now severely deteriorated and distorted music pearl, barely conscious and all but able to form words. Looks to the Moon, however, has remained somewhat the same as she was last seen, although she has a foreboding attitude that points towards some inevitable end. The Saint explores the world, increases their karma level by meeting all the echoes throughout the world, and then ascends by traveling to the depths of the subterranean. Upon completing their pilgrimage, they gain the ability to ascend other creatures, including 5 Pebbles and Looks to the Moon. After ascending the 2 iterators, the Saint heads down to the depths, as per usual, only to find a massive chasm and the pseudo-mirror world of the Rubicon in its place. The Rubicon is the point of no return. Although not canonically being the one to have crossed out Silver of Straw, the only iterator known to have ascended, the Saint still satisfies the triple affirmative. They show themselves to be an affirmative that a solution has been found, seen within the presence of shown characters and known characters like Five Pebbles and Looks to the Moon. Affirmative that a solution is portable, a physical vessel capable of traversing the unknown world. And affirmative that a technical implementation is possible and generally applicable, utilizing their powers to ascend any creature they come across. And that's it. That's the entirety of Ringworld, the beginning to the end. Many questions we may never have answered, like what happened to the Saint? Where did the Rivulet come from? What happened to Silver of Straw? Honestly, I don't know. Ringworld isn't a game about endings. It's a game about beginnings and how they don't stop beginning. The cycles that drive us slowly whirling. I wanted to say thank you. Subscribe if you enjoyed it.
Remember to have a fantastic 24 hours of your day, wherever you are.